electric motorcycle. It's going to be a long trip. Cameras mounted on the side of the bike. They're not on my head, so it doesn't get to bob and look around a whole lot. So just a little cheap HD camera, something I could afford to have fall off the bike. It's attached by a suction cup, and it's safety stringed on, so it doesn't get too far. The mic is out in the open air, so it gets a lot of wind noise. We'll try and subvert that during the playback. I'm going to go a little bit into why I have a 0S motorcycle. And the easiest answer for that is that I gave up. I've always drawn in the back of my head the plans for building my own electric motorcycle. I've been following the electric motorcycle industry for, I'll say, decades. I'm one of the early admirers of the Lectra, which hopefully there's only a few of us old enough to remember that. Never really saw products in the Wisconsin area, so there wasn't anything I could really put my hands on. And I spent my time, almost every 6 months sitting down, looking through Craigslist for old motorcycle frames, looking at all the electric motors, all the electric batteries on the market, and never really got a plan together or a design together that I wanted, or that I felt comfortable within my abilities for. So part of it was that I gave up on building my own. And of course that's not the only factor in it. I also gave up on other things. I'm a big fan of diesel. I've got 3 diesel cars. My lawnmower is diesel. All of them would run biodiesel in the summer. Biodiesel gels at a lot lower temperature, a lot higher temperature than regular diesel, so can't run biodiesel in the winter without some really complicated wiring. And I'd been in the market in my own mind for a diesel motorcycle. And those are, without a doubt, some of the high-end, elite market products that don't really present themselves very often to the commuting consumer. There's some massive custom rigs that get put together. There's some very specialized enduro bikes that run the major races, and not something that I can drop into my commute without wrestling with import, taxes, inspections, finding a dealer that would service. I was in San Diego just several months before buying my electric Zero, and Hayes Motorcycles is out there, and they've got a diesel motorcycle for the military, and they're always asking for the money to do the emissions testing to bring that product into the consumer market, and nobody's been putting up the money. And I was in San Diego, not very far away from their plant, really scrutinizing their website for an opportunity to just stop in and see what they're working on, get a peek over the fence, as you would say. And I realized how static their website was. There really wasn't updates, and a lot of stuff hadn't changed. And that's when I kind of resigned myself to not getting a diesel motorcycle. So we've got 2 major factors coming up. One, I'd given up on designing my own electric motorcycle. I'd given up on really finding a diesel motorcycle. And that's what prompted me to start looking for an electric motorcycle. Well, I'll rehash just a little bit of the mindset that goes into diesel or biodiesel. One could, with diesel, always have a dream of, building your own fuel in your garage, finding a couple of restaurants that'll let you buy their grease, putting together a simple rig, and making your own biodiesel. Even you could go so far as to buy a soybean crop and get that crushed down and just use the straight soybean oil and make it into biodiesel. So one could think in a fantasy mind that I could render myself fuel self-sufficient by piling into the diesel basket all of my eggs. Electric as an alternative fuel has that same appeal in that one could, in their mind or in their real, 5 and 10 year plan, put together a solar rig where they could be charging their motorcycle in the sunshine and, again, be fuel self-sufficient. So making the transition from a diesel forward look to an electric forward look wasn't that much of a mind jump, especially in today's day and age where diesel is turning out not to be as clean as we thought it was when we signed on to the diesel projects. Watched industries rise and fall over the years. I was fairly hesitant to put a deposit down and expect delivery of a cycle that had performance characteristics that I hadn't experienced, hadn't gotten my hands on it. So I was able to find 3 dealers within 100 miles of me, which is rather remarkable, and I hope that doesn't make too many of you jealous. And I made it into the dealer and was actually able to get my hands on a Zero S and take a test drive of it. I mean, I did a nice inspection in the dealer facility. A big, strong admirer of the welds. I liked the way the bike was put together. I was kind of disappointed that it was hard to actually open it up and take a look at any of it. Everything is well enclosed and sealed for weatherproofing reasons, so you can't actually really pop the hood and look at anything. But I was able to get my hands on a bike. I was able to take it for a test drive. I was able to be comfortable with the performance characteristics. I was able to be comfortable with the noise. Early electric motorcycles, in my recollection, had a disparaging characteristic in that they sounded like a table saw coming down the road. And that sound profile kind of struck a note with me as something I was genuinely, concerned about, that it didn't sound good. What I did find was that the Zero S does actually sound good, and I liked it very much. The sound of the bike is a bit science fiction-like. I kind of call it a TIE fighter. It's got a good, healthy whine to it when put under load or at high speeds. Pedestrians and people have the opportunity to hear it as it approaches, or definitely hear it as it goes by and leaves. Sometimes I can find myself sneaking up on bicyclists just because of the way the sound builds up on things. But I'm out here by the Trek manufacturer, and I see a lot of bicyclists on the road. I learned to give them a big, wide berth, and I tend not to startle them that much anymore. Cruising along at highway speeds, all the noise is wind noise to the engines. Once you get your head in a helmet or once somebody's in a car, they're really not going to hear you coming up on them. I've found that not to really be a detriment with other cars. I can't imagine I've ever snuck up on a car that I didn't know they didn't know I was there. So I'm pretty comfortable getting around in traffic. We'll get into some denser traffic here in a little bit, and you'll be able to see that I can manage my space without claiming my territory with noise. Electric range is not as flexible as a gas motorcycle. It's got its target range. Look at about 80 miles on my 2013 Zero S. Doing this type of driving here, which is mostly 55, a little bit of higher speed and a fair amount of city driving. See, that guy pulled out in front of me, and not because he couldn't hear me, but because that's the way we do things around here. I like this turn into traffic and then do a right turn off, but That's how the morning commute is sometimes. So range anxiety for me is I can get to work, I can get back, I can do a deviation of about 15 miles. If I want to run errands on the way back that I know are longer than that, of course I can charge while I'm at work, or I can pick the slower route. I could have turned right back there, taken a slightly lower route. If I bring the bike in to work running below 50 miles an hour, for the target speed, I can really increase my range. The other thing that I had was mentioned earlier is that in my car I run biodiesel in the summer. And when you run biodiesel, you really only have one supplier, and I only had one. It was about 12, 15 miles away from my house. So I had a tremendous amount of range anxiety driving my car because when you only have one gas station and you have to plan your trips, you have to plan when you run out of fuel, you have to target things to maximize getting your tank all the way up. I found out exactly how far I could go after the fuel light went on. And so I was really pushing it. And to me, having the zero is a relief from range anxiety. Every day was a new day. The bike was fully charged in the morning. The way that I rode the day before wasn't a factor. I was able to basically have a reset of potential range anxiety every single day. Running biodiesel in the car, I got fuel about every 2 weeks, aiming for Saturdays when the gas station was open. It wasn't really open to me after work just because of the timing of the trip and their business hours. So range anxiety on the car was very real because as errands had to stack up, make some side trips, I had a 2-week window where everything added on top of each other. With the Zero motorcycle, I'm able to start each day fresh, and I can make decisions on how I ride for that particular day. If I need to run errands, I would take a slightly slower route. If I don't want to run at 60 or 65 miles an hour, I just let a car pass me, and I can drop in at the 55 mile an hour speed limit for the remainder of this stretch and not cost myself any range for the trip home. Battery capacity that more than covered my commute. My thumbnail of my commute is the 50-mile commute. I think it actually works out to 48 miles. I looked at the battery capacities. I rounded down the manufacturer's range projections. The Zero calls the 2013S having 105 miles range of mixed driving, and it uses an EPA standard for what mixed driving is, and that tends to not be what I'm really driving. So you kind of have to grain of salt it. So I aimed more for the highway range. It's rated at, I think, 85 miles of highway, and here I sit at 55 miles an hour for a majority of my commute. And the other thing that I looked at was longevity of the battery. The Zero S battery in the 2013 was rated for over 300,000 miles to maintain 80% of its capacity. So I would look at that in the context of, well, I can do more errands early in the bike's life and be more direct with my commute later in the bike's life without putting that 300,000 miles into context of I'm really not going to be seeing those kind of miles. So I knew the battery was going to, in my expectations, would continue to deliver for the lifetime of the vehicle. So I had a range number that I knew I could work with in my commute. I felt the bike could deliver that range for its lifetime, compensating for any potential deterioration. And so I knew I had a fit for my commute and an electric motorcycle. I'll say up until now, or up until back then, or early in the stages of, electric had a perception of being a little bit anemic on performance. And electric motorcycles, early ones, were no different. If you wanted to get the range, if you wanted to get there, you had to take it easy on the throttle, not pull off, and not to use a lot of the battery to the motor. So when I test drove the Zero S, I switched it to eco mode. This was at the dealership. I put it in eco mode just to start out, get myself familiar with it, and then I took, I would say, a fairly short test drive, mainly because the dealer was surprised to see me back so soon. But about 70 to 80% of that was in eco mode, where the performance was dialed down quite a ways. I think torque was at 70% or maybe slightly less. And I really felt in eco mode that bike had all the performance that I needed as a middle-aged commuter. I was going to be driving it in traffic. I wasn't going to be driving it on the track. I wanted to be able to get out of unsafe situations, not get myself into trouble with too much velocity. So after that eco mode section of the test drive, I switched to sport mode to experience what else the bike could do. And I did indeed find a second motorcycle suddenly available to me. This was now a sports bike, absolutely no doubt about it. I could clear myself of traffic with ease. I could open the throttle up without, I would say, announcing to everyone that I was going to leave them behind. The noise stayed low. It's not like opening up the tailpipes and using cutouts on your exhaust to give yourself a little bit more power. It sounded the same, but it went. And that's what sport mode was like. And I did that for a couple of blocks on the way back to the dealership, and I had experienced everything that I was looking to find out about the bike. I wanted to know how it accelerated. I wanted to know how it sounded. I wanted to get a good feel for the brakes. I wanted to be assured that it was balanced, that it tracked well. It didn't give me a lopsided ride. It didn't make me feel underpowered in traffic, and the Zero delivered all of those things. And that brought us to the rather complicated yet simple topic of the price. A Zero electric motorcycle is expensive for a commuter motorcycle. There are plenty of gasoline motorcycles that are cheaper to buy, and there's a few gasoline motorcycles that are more expensive to buy. The complicated comparison comes into play when you're looking at, if you picked a motorcycle that was the same price as the Zero and tried to compare them feature for feature on everything except the alternative source of power. So again, as a consumer, I was looking for an alternative fuel, and I had given up on diesel and hadn't really gotten serious about propane or natural gas, and electric was the one that made the most sense. So in the context of looking for an electric motorcycle or an alternative fuel motorcycle, the pickings were slim and price comparisons were from a very narrow group. Lovely road. So as a person makes the jump from a gasoline-powered motorcycle to an electric motorcycle, you're actually making it two steps. It's not exactly a lateral transfer. You're first of all leaving internal combustion for some reason, and then you're joining electric for yet another reason. The reasons to leave internal combustion, and the arguments can go back and forth about global warming on different forums than this, is that the fuel source is not renewable. There's no viable candidates out there for a replacement to gasoline that is a perpetual fuel source. And once you did find a replacement for gasoline, there's the ongoing issue with the pollutants from burning gasoline, the toxins that are emitted, the smog-producing particles, and the harm to the national health of everyone else that breathes becomes a factor. And that's a stage that people can go through at any point in this process. But to not leave gasoline and consider electric, it complicates the comparisons. And so the decision has to be made mentally that, or in the position, that I'm going to leave a gasoline behind, and in my case, I'm going to leave diesel behind, because as a fuel and as a propellant, it has certain harms in the environment for its emissions, and it has a limited lifespan, be that in my lifetime or in my grandchildren's lifetime. There is a fixed duration for the amount of petroleum fuel that we can burn. So then I have to go and decide on what alternative fuel to go look for. And it's really sparse pickings for the consumer who goes out looking for an alternative fueled vehicle. And that second step, being independently made, or a non-transitional step, or a non-lateral transfer, puts you in an environment where electric is really quite a reasonable choice. And you'll find that electric is actually very feasible. Excuse me while I double apex that corner back there. So I'm in an environment where I'm looking for alternative fueled vehicle, and so that sets the price premium for a Zero really in its own sphere and compares it to other alternative fueled vehicles. And then that made the decision is, can I afford $15,000, $16,000, $17,000 for a motorcycle? And luckily I reached a point in my life where I can afford that. And so I was able to make both a conscientious decision to step away from gasoline and introduce myself to electric, and through this video introduce you to electric. Divided highway right here. Everybody that's on this has just come off of a 70-mile-an-hour stretch of interstate, so our speeds here are challenging, we'll say. You can see I kind of brought myself to the right side of the lane to get in the mirror of that car coming in. I drive that way to make sure that I can be seen. I guess I'm not driving that way to make sure I can be heard, but when I could be heard, I still drove that way. I placed my car slightly more to the right in those kinds of situations. So this stretch of road here, if I choose to get quickly into work, I would have joined this 70, 65, 60 mile an hour segment further back at one of the first roundabouts that we went through, and shave a few minutes off my time, but also cut a little bit of range off at the end of the day. So I'm making the transition here off the main drag, off the high-speed part of our route. We're now going into some city driving. I think we're about 23, 24 minutes in. A nice clumsy exit, and we're into a major boulevard on the way up to work. This is the point really where other cars have the opportunity to notice that it's an electric, and this being the one of the most frequent window roll down shout at you, is that an electric? Stoplights here. I like to park in the left lane because I'm exiting to the left further up, and that's just the way that I roll things. I like to stop in the left lane. As you can see, the cars on the right can turn right on red. The left lane cannot turn right on red. Most of the time I get to be the lead car at this stoplight, and what I do is stop and back a little ways so that the cars on the right have no one to peer around when they try and turn right on red. Today's that gambit was a loss because I have the giant van in front of me that makes people have to peer around him. And I like to be responsible for other drivers' line of sight, and so I tend to stop in this left lane and make sure that the people turning right have a good view without encroaching on traffic. That might just be me, but that's the way I am. I did a couple of years as a long-haul truck driver and am fairly conscientious, or pretended to be, or like to think I am, conscientious of maintaining other drivers' lines of sight so that they can see around me. On the motorcycle, it's less of a factor, where I want to be conscientious of being in other drivers' lines of sight so that they can see me. As the pundits may declare, is that being quiet and on the road is self-endangering. I'm quiet on this road, and I don't really feel endangered. Well, I do feel endangered, and the point at which you feel the most vulnerable on this route is when you come up to a stoplight and you completely stop and there's no noise. You feel alone. You feel vulnerable. It is just like the weird thing that happens to you. When I bicycle and I get to a complete stop, I can certainly hear my heart beating in my ears and my breath as I'm panting. And bicyclists tend to stick on the shoulders. So when they come to a stop sign like this, or a stoplight like this, they're, half out of traffic and less exposed, but listen, there's nothing going on around me. I don't get to claim my space with any noise. I hear people's cars, I hear people's signal lights, I hear their conversations. You're really alone in your own thoughts in the silence at the stoplights in traffic. The only more vulnerable time than that is motorcycling at night in the country and stopping at the obligatory stop sign, and you've whooshed into this area. There's darkness all around, stars, the moon, all that picturesque stuff. You come to a complete stop, and it is dead quiet, and your headlight only illuminates what's in front of you, and you've got 300 degrees of around you where there's no light, and you don't know what's in the darkness. That is the vulnerability of silence. To me, is the peace that you get at the stop signs and the stoplights, in traffic, in darkness, in the country, all alone. You've got nothing to worry about. Here in traffic, surrounded by friendly cars. Nobody's trying to take my spot. Nobody's encroaching on my space. I can creep along, creep in, but what's obvious is that no one's trying to take my lane from me because they don't hear me there. I've got my spot in traffic. I don't have to defend it with noise. I'm not darting ahead where people don't expect me to be, so I don't need to claim space that way. I just mind my business in the commute, and everybody gets along and doesn't try and take lanes from each other. In this type of stop-and-go traffic, I don't use a whole lot of battery. It's funny is that in the car, if you get stuck in traffic, you can actually feel, oh darn, I'm going to have to get gas sooner because I was stuck in traffic. On the Zero, you get the inverse of that, where, well, I'm in traffic, I'm hardly using any battery at all. So I'm in traffic, just as normal as anybody needs to be. I got my own lane. You'll notice that I'm not flying ahead of everybody. This state does not allow lane splitting. So I don't get to go up through the middle and fly past all of these cars. I do, on the other hand, get to just set back and be a normal commuter. If I swung over into the right-hand lane, which I have a couple different parking options, I'd go into the right-hand lane and be ogled by the people at the bus stops that are about every 2 or 3 blocks here. People at bus stops will give you the best stare because they do watch traffic because they're watching for their bus, but a motorcycle that goes by that doesn't make a whole lot of noise certainly catches their attention. A little pop on some railroad tracks. So what I consider myself doing if I'm in the right-hand lane is I consider myself trolling for looks, which is I'm advertising the Zero to prospective transportees. The left-hand lane is going to exit in a little bit. So that'll be its own lane leaving, so I'll get the road to myself with no one on the left. And I don't do a lot of lane changes because I'm a commuter, and I'm just getting by, finding my way in. On the right, there's Full Spectrum Solar, which is a local solar company who will be my vendor when I go completely self-sufficient for fuel. That will be the solar company that will panel out my house so that my Zero can charge. And then there's a couple businesses that I don't need anything to do with here. There's an oil change place, which I'd like to point out on the right, which is not a place I need to visit with a Zero motorcycle because it doesn't have oil to change, it doesn't have air filters, it doesn't have spark plugs. But as you see from the frame, it does have tires and it does have brakes. So there are certain maintenance items that continue to occur. Just the maintenance items of the internal combustion engine don't come into play so much, or actually at all. So there's still the frame upkeep, making sure that the brake fluid is fresh and ready to go, and making sure that the brakes are well adjusted and not worn out, because we use our brakes occasionally in this state. Got a nice view of the state capitol up ahead. We're actually climbing a small hill here, which you have to really take a good protractor to the screen to actually notice. But it's an uphill climb towards the Capitol because that's about where I work. Stop and go traffic doesn't really impact my range at all. But it does give us the opportunity to talk about long trips on the Zero motorcycle. Oh, we come up to my favorite thing. I really like catching red lights because I get to stop and be completely quiet and listen to all the cars go by. The Zero motorcycle out of the box isn't a touring bike. I can do my 100 miles in a day if that's what I want, but that's kind of all the further that I'm going to go. There are aftermarket products, there's additional chargers, there's additional plugs that you can get that make it, you know, reasonably functional to do a cross-country trip. It's not out of the box. It takes a little bit of adjustment of personality. There's some real great outgoing people who I know have followed their blogs, watched their videos where they've crossed the United States from east to west, they've crossed the United States from north to south. For me, the Zero is a commuter vehicle, but it doesn't take much, I mean, a couple $1,000s or even several $1,000s in upgrades to take this bike to a condition where you could drive it for an entire day and clear off 300, 400, or 500 miles in a day. What I found is, as a full-time employee and regular worker, is I don't have time for that. And I don't have a lot of people that would fit on the bike to go on a trip like that. So when the family goes on vacation, we tend to take a larger vehicle, and I haven't had a call being at my own time to make a long motorcycle trip in quite a while. And so if you didn't buy the Zero because you want to do road trips, you really have to recognize how often do you do road trips. And I suppose when I was younger I did a lot of them, but now that I've reached this age, we'll call it middle age for lack of a better term, I just don't go on long motorcycle rides. I don't have the time. But what I do have nearly every single day is this commute where I ride into work. And on the odd chance that occasionally I do get some vacation time, the motorcycle's not the only vehicle that we got. It's great to have an alternative fuel as an alternative vehicle, I guess. And the motorcycle allows me to, in its subservient motorcycle role, be the vehicle of convenience without having to carry the burden of being the primary transport for going to the grocery store, going on vacation, going out when it's raining. So I get to charge this at home, use it when it's available, be reasonably responsible environmentally, and bridge the gap for myself and my own driving into alternative fuels, so that now that I'm familiar with charging stations, charging styles, I'm much more comfortable in saying maybe the next thing is going to be an electric car, because I know through the range experimentation that I'm allowed to do with a motorcycle, which, if I got it completely wrong, is a lot easier to get towed home. I can just put that in the back of the van or the back of the pickup truck and take it home. If I had an electric car and I did that, it would be more of a hassle. So I can be experimenting and finding the boundaries of what electric can do for me in motorcycle form, so I can have fun doing it too. Pulling into the parking ramp, I'm in it. Figure mid 60% of battery left. If I take it real easy, I can get to work with 75% of the battery left. So thanks for listening. Thanks for watching this long drive to work, because that's how I get here.